The morning sun beat down on Camp Pendleton's advanced sniper range with a kind of intensity that made mirages dance across the desert floor. Lieutenant Commander Nora Bridger stood at the edge of the observation deck, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the part of a junior logistics officer who had wandered into the wrong briefing. Her uniform was crisp but unremarkable, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her posture carefully cultivated to project competence without confidence. Nobody looked at her twice. That was exactly the point. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan's voice cut through the morning air like a drill sergeant's whistle. This is an elite program, people. Marine Scout Sniper School produces the finest long-range marksmen in the world. We don't have time for observers who don't understand the first thing about what we do here. He wasn't looking directly at Nora, but the message landed anyway. 3 days into her assignment, and Brennan had made his position crystal clear. Logistics personnel were necessary evils, paper pushers who existed to ensure ammunition arrived on time, and nothing more. The fact that she was a woman made it worse in his eyes. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened whenever Captain Vincent Reeves asked her opinion during briefings. Nora made a notation on her clipboard, careful to keep her expression neutral. 12 years of special operations had taught her many things, but perhaps the most valuable was how to become invisible in plain sight. Her call sign among her SEAL team was Phantom, earned not just for her ability to slip through enemy territory undetected, but for the way she could blend into any environment, any role, any situation that required her to disappear into the background noise of military life. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of courage or underestimation in your own military or professional experience. The training range stretched out before them like a carefully orchestrated theater of war. 6 firing positions, each equipped with high-end sniper systems. Barrett M82S, Macmillan TAC-50S, rifles that cost more than most people's cars. Downrange, targets have been positioned at intervals stretching from 800 meters to nearly 2,000. Today's exercise was supposed to be a demonstration for visiting commanders from 3 different branches, a showcase of Marine precision and training excellence. Brennan continued his briefing, his chest puffed with the pride of a man who believed his domain was unassailable. We've got live-fire exercises scheduled for 1,400 hours. 6 teams, 12 shooters, synchronized targeting protocols. This is what joint operations training looks like when Marines lead the way. Nora's eyes tracked across the range layout, her mind automatically calculating angles, windage, elevation adjustments. It was instinct now, as natural as breathing. She'd made shots in conditions far worse than this, in places where failure meant more than embarrassment. But today she was just Lieutenant Commander Bridger, logistics specialist, here to observe resource allocation and equipment utilization for some bureaucratic report that nobody would read. Captain Reeves stepped forward, his weathered face showing the kind of respect for his Marines that came from years of leading them. Staff Sergeant Brennan has put together an impressive demonstration. The Joint Chiefs are particularly interested in how we're integrating new targeting systems with traditional marksman skills. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb caught Nora's eye from across the deck. The young Marine was one of the few who'd treated her with basic courtesy since her arrival. He gave a slight nod, then returned his attention to checking his rifle, a well-maintained M40A6 that showed signs of careful use and constant maintenance. His hands moved with the kind of easy confidence that separated trained snipers from merely competent shooters. Gunnery Sergeant Rita Cordova stood off to one side, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The senior Marine had been watching Nora with increasing curiosity over the past 3 days. Not hostile like Brennan, but definitely suspicious. Cordova had been in the Corps for 22 years and had developed the kind of instinct that recognized when something didn't quite add up. Nora could feel that gaze on her even now, cataloging, analyzing, questioning. The wind shifted, coming from the northwest at approximately 8 knots. Nora felt it on her skin, the same way she'd felt it in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in a dozen other places where wind meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her fingers twitched slightly, muscle memory wanting to make calculations that would be entirely inappropriate for a logistics officer to know. Brennan moved to the tactical display board, his pointer striking the map with theatrical precision. Each team will engage targets in sequence, he explained, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who'd never been wrong. Team Alpha starts at position 1, works through targets at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. Team Bravo follows the same progression from position 2. We cycle through until all 6 teams have completed their runs. Nora's eyes narrowed as she studied the range layout on the map. Something fell off, but she couldn't quite place it yet. The distances looked correct, the positions seemed standard enough, but there was something in the geometry that didn't align properly. She made another note on her clipboard, this one more deliberate. Captain Reeves nodded his approval. Impressive coordination. What's the safety radius for the downrange observation posts? Brennan didn't hesitate. Standard 1,500 meters, sir. We've got spotters positioned at OP1 and OP2, while clear of any possible trajectory cone. That's when it clicked. Nora's mind ran the calculations automatically, years of training making the math instantaneous. The observation posts were marked at coordinates that would be fine for standard training, but the firing sequence Brennan had outlined created overlapping fields of fire. When Team Charlie rotated to position 3 and engaged the 1,200-meter target, their trajectory would pass within 300 meters of OP2. Within the danger zone, she cleared her throat quietly. Captain Reeves, if I might ask a clarification question about the observation post positions. Brennan's head snapped around, his expression already hardening into irritation. This is a tactical briefing, Lieutenant Commander. Equipment logistics can wait until after we cover the actual shooting. I understand, Staff Sergeant, Nora replied, keeping her voice level and deferential. I was simply wondering about the safety protocols for the downrange personnel. The safety protocols are ironclad, Brennan shot back. I've been running this range for 3 years. We've never had an incident, and we're not going to start now just because some desk officer from Supply Division suddenly developed an interest in ballistics. The room went quiet. Several Marines shifted uncomfortably and used to seeing their staff sergeant dress down an officer, even a junior one. Captain Reeves frowned slightly, but didn't intervene. The politics of inter-service cooperation were delicate, and a Navy lieutenant commander questioning a Marine staff sergeant's range safety wasn't the kind of fight anyone wanted to pick during a joint training operation. Nora felt the familiar weight of the moment. She could push harder, could pull rank despite her supposedly junior logistics position, could force them to recheck the calculations. But that would raise questions about how a supply officer knew enough about long-range ballistics to spot a potential safety issue. Her cover was more important than her ego. Understood, Staff Sergeant, she said simply, and returned to her clipboard. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova's eyes had gone from curious to alert. She stepped closer to the tactical display, her finger tracing the firing positions and target locations. Brennan, walk me through the rotation sequence one more time. When Charlie team moves to position 3, what's their target progression? Brennan's irritation transferred seamlessly from Nora to Cordova. Gunny, we've been over this twice already. 800, 1,000, 1,200. Same as everyone else. It's not complicated. And OP2 is positioned where exactly? Cordova's voice had gone flat, professional, the tone of a senior non-commissioned officer who wasn't asking anymore, just confirming. Brennan pointed at the map. Right there. Grid coordinates 77423. 1,500 meters from the primary firing line, well outside the danger zone. From the primary firing line, Cordova repeated slowly. But position 3 isn't on the primary firing line, is it? The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Brennan's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Captain Reeves stepped forward, his own finger tracing the angles on the map. His expression shifted from interested to concerned in the span of 3 seconds. Staff Sergeant Brennan, Reeves said quietly, I want you to recalculate the trajectory cone from position 3 to the 1,200-meter target, and then tell me how far that cone passes from OP2. Sir, I've already run these numbers, Brennan protested, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Run them again, Reeves ordered. Nora stood perfectly still, her clipboard held at parade rest position, watching as Brennan pulled out his range calculator and began working through the geometry. She could see the moment he realized his error, the way his shoulders stiffened and his jaw clenched. The observation post wasn't in the direct line of fire, but it was well within the trajectory cone when accounting for the offset angle of position 3. How far, Staff Sergeant? Reeves asked. 280 meters, sir, Brennan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain's face remained professionally neutral, but Nora could see the flash of anger in his eyes. That's a critical safety violation. If we'd run this exercise as planned, we could have had rounds passing within killing distance of our own spotters. Marcus Webb had gone pale. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova simply nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. And Brennan stood frozen, his carefully constructed demonstration crumbling around him like a sandcastle at high tide. Captain Reeves turned away from the tactical display, his jaw working silently as he processed the implications. We're postponing the demonstration, he announced. Staff Sergeant Brennan, you'll recalculate the entire range layout and submit revised coordinates to my office by 1800 hours. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova will review your work before it comes to me. Yes, sir, Brennan replied, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. His eyes found Nora for just a moment, and the look he gave her was pure venom. She'd humiliated him without saying a word, just by asking a simple question that had prompted Cordova to look closer. In his mind, this was her fault, not his. The briefing room emptied quickly, Marines filing out with the subdued energy of men who'd just witnessed their leader make a catastrophic error. Marcus Webb paused near Nora on his way out. That was a good catch, ma'am, he said quietly. Would have been bad if we'd gone live with those coordinates. Just doing my job, petty officer, Nora replied with a slight smile, making sure all the pieces fit together properly. After he left, only Cordova remained. The gunnery sergeant approached slowly, her eyes studying Nora with the intensity of a sniper acquiring a target. That was an interesting question you asked, Lieutenant Commander. Pretty specific concern for someone whose expertise is supposed to be in supply chain management. Nora met her gaze steadily. I review a lot of training exercises, Gunny. After a while, you start to recognize patterns. Safety protocols are pretty standard across all branches. Cordova nodded slowly, but the suspicion hadn't left her eyes. I've been doing this for 22 years. I've seen a lot of logistics officers come through here. Most of them couldn't tell you the difference between a firing line and a chow line, but you knew exactly what to look for. I'm thorough, Nora said simply. The two women stood in silence for a moment, measuring each other. Finally, Cordova spoke again, her voice lower. I don't know what your story is, and maybe I don't need to, but I want you to know something. Brennan's got an ego problem, but he's not stupid. He knows you embarrassed him in there, even if you did it politely. He's going to be looking for ways to push back. I appreciate the warning, Nora replied. Cordova turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm glad you were here today. Those boys at OP2 don't know how close they came to having a very bad afternoon. After she left, Nora allowed herself a slow breath. The mission was already more complicated than it should have been. She'd been sent here by Naval Special Warfare Command to conduct a security assessment of the Joint Training Facility, specifically looking for gaps in protocols and potential vulnerabilities. Her cover as a logistics officer gave her access to observe multiple training operations without drawing attention. The plan had been to watch quietly, document everything, and submit her findings after 2 weeks of observation. Instead, she'd been forced to intervene on day 3, and now she had a suspicious gunnery sergeant and a hostile staff sergeant both paying far too much attention to the quiet Navy officer who was supposed to blend into the background. Her commanding officer, James Ashford, was going to have some pointed questions about how she'd managed to compromise her cover so quickly. Nora walked outside into the afternoon heat, her mind already working through contingency plans. The training facility sprawled across several square miles of California desert, a complex network of ranges, barracks, and administrative buildings. Security was decent, but not exceptional. She'd already identified 3 separate weaknesses in the perimeter monitoring system and 2 gaps in the visitor credential verification process. This place needed work, and her report was going to recommend significant changes. But first, she had to survive the next 11 days without blowing her cover completely. The afternoon brought a temporary reprieve. With the demonstration postponed, most of the sniper teams had dispersed to other training activities. Nora spent 3 hours in the logistics office, actually doing the paperwork that her cover required. Requisition forms, equipment inventories, maintenance schedules. It was mind-numbing work, but it had to look authentic. She'd learned long ago that the best covers were built on layers of genuine detail. At 1700 hours, her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. The message was brief and unsigned. Range modifications complete. Captain wants full briefing at 0800 tomorrow. Your presence requested. Nora deleted the message and pocketed her phone. Tomorrow's briefing would be interesting. Brennan would have spent the afternoon recalculating every coordinate, double-checking every safety margin, making absolutely certain that no one could find another flaw in his work. He'd be defensive, angry, and looking for any opportunity to reassert his authority. She needed to be even more careful tomorrow than she'd been today. The evening found her in the officer's mess, a plate of unremarkable chicken and vegetables in front of her, eating alone at a corner table. She'd positioned herself with a clear view of both entrances, another habit that was so ingrained she didn't even think about it anymore. Most of the other officers gave her a wide berth. Word had spread about the briefing room incident, and no one wanted to be associated with the Navy officer who'd made the Marine sniper instructor look incompetent. Marcus Webb approached her table hesitantly, his meal tray balanced in one hand. "Mind if I sit, ma'am?" he asked. Nora gestured to the empty chair across from her. She'd expected someone to make contact eventually. Webb seemed like the type who'd be curious rather than hostile. The young Marine settled into his seat and began eating, not speaking for a few minutes. Finally, he looked up. "Can I ask you something, Lieutenant Commander?" "Go ahead, Petty Officer." "How do you know?" Webb asked quietly. "About the observation post, I mean. That's not the kind of thing most people would catch, especially not someone who's supposed to be looking at supply chains." Nora took a sip of water, buying herself a moment to formulate an answer that wouldn't raise more questions. "I had a cousin who was a sniper," she said, mixing truth with fiction the way all good cover stories did. "He died in Helmand Province, 2011. After that, I made a point to understand what he did, how it worked. It seemed important to know." Webb nodded slowly, accepting the explanation. "I'm sorry about your cousin, ma'am." "Thank you." They ate in silence for another minute before Webb spoke again. "Brennan's pretty angry. I heard him talking to some of the other instructors after the briefing. He thinks you're here to make him look bad, like some kind of Inspector General investigation." "Am I?" Nora asked. Webb met her eyes directly. "I don't think so, ma'am. I think you actually gave a damn about those spotters at OP2. Brennan's too proud to see it, but you probably saved lives today." "Just asked a question," Nora replied. "Gunnery Sergeant Cordova's the one who followed through." Webb smiled slightly. "Yeah, but you knew what question to ask. That's the hard part." After Webb left, Nora finished her meal and headed back to her temporary quarters, a small room in the officers' barracks that held a bed, a desk, and not much else. She pulled out her encrypted laptop and began typing her daily report, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Commander Ashford would read this within the hour, and he needed to know that her cover was potentially compromised. The report was clinical and precise. She detailed the range safety issue, Brennan's hostile response, Cordova's suspicion, and Webb's curiosity. She noted that continuing the assignment might be problematic, but recommended staying in place unless ordered otherwise. The mission was important enough to justify some risk. She hit send and closed the laptop, then lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. 12 years of operating in the shadows had taught her patience, but she'd never been good at the waiting part. Action she could handle. Combat, infiltration, direct action missions, those all made sense. But this slow burn of undercover work, maintaining a facade day after day, always watching every word and gesture, it wore on her in ways that firefights never had. Her phone buzzed. A secure message from Ashford. Continue mission. Maintain cover. Authorization granted for tactical flexibility if situation deteriorates. We'll monitor closely. Tactical flexibility was SEAL speak for do what you need to do. Just don't make it worse. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was better than being pulled out. The next morning arrived with the kind of desert clarity that made everything seem sharp-edged and too bright. Nora was up at off of 100, going through a carefully modified PT routine that looked like standard military fitness, but didn't showcase the kind of conditioning that would raise questions. She ran 3 miles at a respectable but unremarkable pace, did regulation push-ups and sit-ups, stretched properly. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. By 07:30, she was showered, uniformed, and walking across the compound toward the briefing room with her ever-present clipboard. Other officers and senior enlisted were converging on the same building, the Marine sniper instructors moving with the easy confidence of men on their home ground. Brennan was already inside when she arrived, standing next to the tactical display with his revised range calculations spread across the table. He looked like he hadn't slept much, his eyes slightly red-rimmed, his jaw tight. When he saw Nora enter, his expression hardened further. Captain Reeves arrived precisely at 0800, Gunnery Sergeant Cordova at his side. "All right, Staff Sergeant," the captain said without preamble. "Show me what you've got." Brennan launched into his presentation with the forced enthusiasm of a man trying to reclaim lost ground. "Sir, I've completely recalculated the range layout. All firing positions have been repositioned to ensure clear trajectory cones. Observation posts have been relocated to grid coordinates that place them a minimum of 1,800 meters from any possible firing solution. I've also implemented additional safety protocols, including real-time communication links between all positions and a master range safety officer with authority to halt fire at any time." Captain Reeves studied the new layout carefully, his finger tracing the positions and angles. "Gunnery Sergeant, your assessment?" Cordova leaned over the display, her experienced eyes checking every detail. "It's solid, sir. The new positions eliminate the overlap problem completely. The additional safety protocols are above standard requirements. I'll be comfortable running live fire with this setup." Reeves nodded. "Good. We'll reschedule the demonstration for the day after tomorrow. That gives us time to physically reposition the equipment and brief all personnel on the new procedures. Staff Sergeant Brennan, you'll personally walk every team through the changes." "Yes, sir," Brennan replied, but his eyes were on Nora. "Lieutenant Commander Bridger, since you have such a keen interest in range safety, perhaps you'd like to observe the repositioning process. Make sure we're doing everything by the book." The challenge was unmistakable. Reeves caught it too, his expression showing mild disapproval at Brennan's tone, but he didn't intervene. The politics of joint operations meant letting junior officers work out their own friction, as long as it stayed professional. "I'd be happy to observe, Staff Sergeant," Nora replied evenly. "That's why I'm here, after all." The next 2 days were masterclass in passive aggression. Brennan made sure Nora was present for every single equipment move, every measurement verification, every safety check. He'd call her over to confirm distances that any private could verify, ask her opinion on matters of basic arithmetic, essentially treating her like a particularly annoying quality control inspector. The other Marines picked up on the dynamic quickly, some finding it amusing, others uncomfortable with their staff sergeant's obvious hostility toward a superior officer. Nora endured it all with professional courtesy, making her observations, taking her notes, and never rising to the bait. She'd been through SEAL training, had survived Hell Week, had operated in conditions that made Brennan's petty harassment look like a mild inconvenience. If he wanted to waste her time to salvage his ego, that was fine. It gave her more opportunities to observe the facility's operations. On the afternoon before the rescheduled demonstration, Nora was standing at the newly positioned observation post 2, checking sight lines with a rangefinder, when Cordova appeared beside her. "He's being an ass," the gunnery sergeant said without preamble. "He's being thorough," Nora replied diplomatically. "He's being an ass," Cordova repeated. "And we both know it. Look, I don't know what your real story is, Lieutenant Commander, and I'm not asking, but I've been around long enough to recognize when something doesn't add up. You move like an operator, not a desk jockey. You see things that most officers wouldn't notice. And you've got the kind of calm that only comes from serious training." Nora continued looking through the rangefinder, not responding immediately. Finally, she lowered the device and turned to face Cordova directly. "What are you suggesting, Gunny?" "I'm suggesting that whoever you really are, you're not just here to count ammunition requisitions." Cordova's voice was quiet but firm. "And I'm also suggesting that it doesn't matter to me. You stopped a potential disaster, and that's good enough for my book. But Brennan's pride is wounded, and wounded pride makes people do stupid things. Watch your back." "I always do," Nora replied. The morning of the demonstration arrived with clear skies and perfect shooting conditions. Light winds from the southwest, temperature in the low 70s, visibility unlimited. The kind of day that range officers dreamed about. By on and 100, the firing positions were manned, the observation posts were staffed, and a small group of visiting officers had assembled on the observation deck to watch the Marine Scout sniper program showcase its capabilities. Captain Reeves stood at the front of the deck, addressing the visitors with the practiced ease of a career officer. "Gentlemen, what you're about to witness represents the pinnacle of long-range precision marksmanship. Our Marine snipers trained for months to achieve the level of accuracy you'll see today. Staff Sergeant Brennan has designed this demonstration to showcase not just individual shooting skills, but also the coordination and safety protocols that make joint operations effective." Brennan stood nearby, his chest puffed with restored confidence. The range layout was perfect now, the safety margins were bulletproof, and he was about to prove that his program was world-class. He'd even managed a tight smile when Captain Reeves had acknowledged him by name. Nora watched from her usual position at the edge of the group, clipboard in hand, eyes constantly scanning. She'd learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now those instincts were telling her something wasn't quite right. Nothing she could identify specifically, just a feeling that came from too many missions where the difference between success and disaster was noticing the one thing that didn't fit the pattern. The first team moved into position, a pair of Marines settling behind a Barrett M82. The spotter called out environmental conditions. The shooter made minute adjustments to his scope, and then the distinctive boom of the .50 caliber rifle echoed across the range. Downrange, the target at 800 meters sprouted a perfect center mass hit. The visitors murmured their approval. Brennan's smile widened slightly. Team 2 followed with similar success, then Team 3. The demonstration was proceeding flawlessly, each shot finding its mark, each team executing with the precision that justified the Marine Corps' reputation for marksmanship excellence. By the time Team 4 moved into position, even Captain Reeves looked satisfied. That's when Nora saw it. A slight shimmer in the air downrange, visible only because she was looking at exactly the right angle when the sun hit it. Heat distortion, but not the natural kind that came from desert thermals. This was concentrated, specific, moving slowly across the range floor in a pattern that didn't match the wind direction. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on the area near Observation Post 2. There was a vehicle there that hadn't been present during her inspections yesterday. A maintenance truck positioned about 50 meters behind the observation post, its engine running to power some kind of equipment in the back. The heat shimmer was coming from that truck, and if the truck was running equipment that generated that much heat, it was affecting the air density in the exact corridor where Team 5 would be shooting through in approximately 4 minutes. The environmental conditions that the spotter would call out would be accurate for the firing position, but completely wrong for the actual bullet path through the superheated air column near the observation post. Nora's mind ran the calculations instantly. A 50 caliber round traveling through air that was 15 to 20 degrees hotter than anticipated would experience different drag coefficients. At 1,200 meters, that could mean a deviation of 8 to 10 inches. Maybe more. The shot would still be safe, would still pass while clear the observation post, but it would miss the target completely. And a miss during a high-profile demonstration would be devastating to the program's reputation. She looked at Brennan, who was watching Team 4's successful engagement with visible satisfaction. He had no idea. The truck had probably arrived early this morning, some maintenance crew doing routine work, and nobody had thought to mention it, because it was well behind the observation post, technically outside the range danger area. Nora stepped forward, moving closer to Captain Reeves. "Sir, I need to bring something to your attention." Reeves turned, his expression showing mild irritation at being interrupted during the demonstration. "What is it, Lieutenant Commander?" "There's a maintenance vehicle operating behind OP2. It's generating significant heat distortion that could affect the trajectory calculations for Team 5's engagement." Brennan's head whipped around, his face already flushing red. "That truck is outside the safety zone. It has no impact on range operations. It's creating an air density anomaly directly in the flight path," Nora said calmly. "The environmental conditions at the firing position won't match the conditions downrange. Team 5 spotter won't be able to account for it." Brennan stepped toward her, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only those immediately nearby could hear. "You've been here less than a week, and you're trying to shut down my demonstration again? This is harassment, plain and simple. You're looking for problems that don't exist because you have some kind of agenda." "Staff Sergeant, I'm simply pointing out a variable that wasn't present during your planning," Nora replied, keeping her voice level despite the anger radiating for Brennan. Captain Reeves looked between them, then pulled out his own range finder and examined the area near OP2. After a long moment, he lowered the device, his expression thoughtful. "I can see the heat distortion from here. Staff Sergeant, what's your assessment?" Brennan's jaw worked silently. He grabbed binoculars and looked downrange, taking longer than necessary, clearly hoping the problem would somehow disappear if he looked at it long enough. Finally, he lowered the binoculars. "Sir, there is some heat distortion present, but it's minimal. Our spotters are trained to account for environmental variables. At 1,200 meters, minimal becomes significant," Nora said quietly. Reeves made his decision. "Hold Team 5. Get someone down to that truck and shut it off. We'll wait 5 minutes for the air to stabilize, then resume." Brennan's face had gone from red to nearly purple. "Yes, sir," he managed through gritted teeth, then turned and strode toward the communication station to relay the order. The next 5 minutes were excruciatingly uncomfortable. The visiting officers looked confused, murmuring among themselves about the delay. Team 5 remained in position, their shooter looking back toward the observation deck with obvious puzzlement. And Brennan stood at the communication station with his back rigidly straight, radiating fury. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova approached Nora quietly. "You've got good eyes, Lieutenant Commander. I didn't catch that truck until you mentioned it." "Just lucky timing," Nora replied. "I happened to be looking at the right angle when the sun hit it." Cordova's expression said she didn't believe that for a second, but she just nodded and moved away. The maintenance truck shut down, its operator clearly confused about why he'd been ordered to cut his engine in the middle of a routine task. The heat distortion gradually dissipated, the superheated air mixing with the cooler ambient temperature until the corridor was clear. After 5 minutes, Captain Reeves gave the order to resume. Team 5 moved through their engagement sequence, the spotter calling out conditions, the shooter making his adjustments. The Barrett roared, and the round struck the 1,200-meter target 2 inches left of center. A solid hit, but noticeably off from the perfect center mass shots that the previous teams had achieved. Reeves turned to Brennan with raised eyebrows. "What happened there, Staff Sergeant?" Brennan's voice was tight. "Could be a number of factors, sir. Wind shift, slight variation in ammunition, shooter error, or residual heat distortion that hasn't fully dissipated yet," Cordova added quietly. The implication hung in the air like smoke. If they'd shot through the full heat column without waiting, the miss would have been dramatically worse. Nora had been right, and everyone on the observation deck knew it. She could see it in the way the visiting officers looked at her with new interest, in the way Marcus Webb gave her a small nod of respect, in the way Captain Reeves' expression had shifted from irritated to thoughtful. And she could see it most clearly in the way Brennan was looking at her now, his eyes filled with something darker than mere anger. This wasn't just wounded pride anymore. This was active hostility from a man who felt his professional reputation being systematically dismantled by someone he considered beneath him. The demonstration concluded with Team 6 executing a flawless sequence, restoring some of the program's momentum. The visiting officers departed with polite compliments and promises to submit positive reports about the training capabilities they'd witnessed. But Nora could see the subtle disappointment in Captain Reeves' face. The demonstration had been good, not exceptional. 2 interruptions and an off-center hit had taken to shine off what should have been a showcase of Marine excellence. After the visitors left, Reeves called a brief meeting with his senior staff. Brennan, Cordova, and several other instructors gathered in the briefing room, with Nora standing at the back as was appropriate for her supposed role. The captain's voice was measured but firm. Today was acceptable, but not what we'd planned. I want a full review of our pre-operation checklists. If there are vehicles operating near the range, I want them logged and evaluated for potential impact. We can't afford these kinds of oversights during high-visibility demonstrations. Brennan nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for not identifying the maintenance truck as a potential variable. Reeves waved that away. The truck wasn't your fault, but our checklist procedures should have caught it. That's a system issue, not a personal one. He paused, then continued. I also want to acknowledge that Lieutenant Commander Bridger's observations have been valuable. She's identified issues that we should have caught ourselves. That's not a criticism of this unit. It's a reminder that fresh eyes sometimes see things we miss because we're too close to our own operations. The words were diplomatic, but they landed like grenades in the room. Several instructors shifted uncomfortably. Brennan's expression remained carefully neutral, but Nora could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. After the meeting, Nora headed toward the logistics office to complete her daily paperwork. She'd made it halfway across the compound when Brennan's voice called out behind her. Lieutenant Commander, a word. She turned, waiting as he approached. His stride was aggressive, purposeful, and when he stopped he was standing closer than professional courtesy required. We need to establish some boundaries, he said, his voice low and hard. I'm listening, Staff Sergeant, Nora replied calmly. You're here as an observer. That means you observe and report. You don't interrupt operations in real time. You've undermined my authority twice now in front of my Marines and visiting officers. That ends today. Nora met his eyes steadily. Staff Sergeant, I've identified legitimate safety and operational concerns. That's part of my assignment. If you have an issue with my conduct, you should take it up with Captain Reeves. I'm taking it up with you first, Brennan shot back. This is my range, my program, my Marines. I've been running successful training operations here for 3 years. I don't need some Navy supply officer who took a weekend marksmanship course telling me how to do my job. The contempt in his voice was palpable. Nora felt the familiar surge of anger that she'd learned to control years ago, the impulse to put this arrogant instructor in his place with a demonstration of exactly what she was capable of. But that would blow her cover completely and compromise the entire mission. I understand your frustration, Staff Sergeant, she said instead, but my observations stand. If you'd like to discuss specific concerns about my methodology, I'm happy to do that through proper channels. Brennan leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I know your type. You're looking to make a name for yourself by finding problems with established programs, probably hoping for a promotion or a better assignment. Well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to document every single thing you do for the rest of your time here. Every question, every observation, every interaction. And when you leave, I'm going to submit a formal complaint about your interference with Marine Corps training operations. That's your prerogative, Nora replied. Just make sure your documentation is accurate. She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes boring into her back. This was getting out of hand. Brennan wasn't just hostile now. He was actively working to undermine her presence at the facility. And while she could handle his antagonism, it was making her actual mission much more difficult. The more attention she drew, the harder it was to observe other aspects of the base's security protocols. That evening, she sent another encrypted report to Commander Ashford, detailing the escalating situation with Brennan. She recommended accelerating the assessment timeline, completing her observations within the next week rather than the originally planned 2 weeks. The risks of maintaining her cover were starting to outweigh the benefits of extended observation. Ashford's response came within an hour. Negative on timeline acceleration. Intelligence indicates potential security tests planned for facility within next 10 days. Your presence during test is priority. Maintain cover and continue mission. Additional support standing by if needed. Nora read the message twice, then deleted it. A security test that explained why Naval Special Warfare Command had been so insistent on placing an operator inside the facility. Someone was going to probe the base's defenses, probably a red team exercise designed to identify vulnerabilities. And she needed to be in position to observe how the facility responded, which meant dealing with Brennan's hostility for at least another week, possibly longer. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling again, mentally preparing for what was coming. The demonstration today had been just the beginning. Brennan would be watching her constantly now, looking for any excuse to challenge her presence or question her authority. And she'd have to navigate that minefield while simultaneously conducting her actual assessment and preparing for whatever security test was coming. The next 3 days passed in a state of tense equilibrium. Brennan kept his distance, but Nora could feel his surveillance like a physical weight. He was documenting everything, just as he'd promised. Every time she attended a briefing, every time she walked the ranges, every conversation she had with other personnel, she could see him making notes or talking quietly with his instructors, building his case against her. Captain Reeves seemed aware of the dynamic, but chose not to intervene directly. He'd assigned Nora to observe additional training operations beyond the sniper program, giving her broader access to the facility while also spreading her presence across multiple units. It was a diplomatic solution that kept her away from Brennan while still allowing her to complete her assessment. Nora used the time productively. She observed the base's visitor screening procedures and found them adequate but not exceptional. She watched the perimeter patrol patterns and noted they were predictable, following the same routes at the same intervals. She examined the communication protocols between different units and identified potential gaps in emergency response coordination. All of it went into her encrypted reports, building a comprehensive picture of the facility's security posture. On the 4th morning after the demonstration, Marcus Webb found her observing a close-quarters combat training session. "Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Brennan wants to see you at the range office," he said, his expression apologetic. "Did he say why, petty officer?" "No, ma'am. Just asked me to find you and send you over." Nora nodded and made her way across the compound to the range complex. The office was a small building adjacent to the main firing line, used for scheduling, safety briefings, and equipment management. When she entered, she found Brennan behind the desk, Gunnery Sergeant Cordova standing near the window, and 2 other Marine instructors she didn't recognize flanking the door. "Lieutenant Commander Bridger," Brennan said, his voice carrying formal precision. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." "I'll stand." "Thank you," Nora replied. "What can I do for you, Staff Sergeant?" Brennan pulled out a folder thick with papers. "I've been reviewing your credentials and background, as is my right when evaluating personnel who observe my training operations. Your service record shows logistics assignments, supply chain management, administrative roles. Nothing that would explain your apparent expertise in long-range ballistics, trajectory analysis, or environmental impact on precision marksmanship." "I've explained my background, Staff Sergeant," Nora said evenly. "I had a family member who was a sniper. I educated myself about the field." Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, your cousin, who died in Helmand Province in 2011. Except I've contacted several Marine sniper veterans from that period, and none of them remember any Navy logistics officer's cousins serving in their units. Strange, don't you think? Nora felt her pulse quicken slightly, but her expression remained calm. He was a Navy SEAL, not a Marine. Different community entirely. Brennan flipped through the papers. I've also been asking around about you, Lieutenant Commander. Called some contacts at Naval Personnel Command. You know what they told me? Your file is remarkably thin for someone with 12 years of service. Most of your assignments are classified or restricted access. That's unusual for a logistics officer. Some logistics work involves classified programs, Nora replied. That's not particularly remarkable. Cordova spoke up from the window, her voice thoughtful rather than accusatory. Here's what I think, Lieutenant Commander. I think you're not who you claim to be. I think you've got training and experience that goes way beyond counting supply crates. And I think whatever your real job is, it's got nothing to do with requisition forms. The two instructors at the door shifted their positions slightly, blocking the exit more deliberately. Nora's situational awareness kicked into high gear, cataloging threats and options. For Marines, all larger than her, all trained fighters in a closed room. Not ideal, but manageable if it came to that. But handling this with violence would destroy not just her cover, but potentially the entire assessment mission. Brennan stood up slowly, moving around the desk. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us what you're really doing here. Are you investigating me? The program? Is this some kind of Inspector General operation? Because if it is, you're doing it wrong. You can't just waltz in here under false pretenses and expect us to cooperate. Nora measured her words carefully. Staff Sergeant, I understand you're frustrated, but I'm not authorized to discuss the details of my assignment beyond what I've already told you. If you have concerns, take them to Captain Reeves or submit them through your chain of command. Not good enough, Brennan said, his voice hardening. You've embarrassed me, undermined my authority, and now you're hiding behind classification protocols. I want answers, and I want them now. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Cordova looked uncomfortable now, as if realizing this confrontation had gone further than she'd intended. The two instructors at the door remained motionless, waiting for direction from Brennan. Nora's mind ran through options. She could continue stonewalling, which would likely escalate the situation further. She could contact Commander Ashford for guidance, but that would show weakness and confirm she was something other than a simple logistics officer. Or she could give them just enough truth to defuse the immediate crisis without revealing the full scope of her mission. Before she could respond, the office door opened. Captain Reeves stepped inside, his expression thunderous. Staff Sergeant Brennan, what exactly is going on here? The room transformed instantly. The two instructors at the door snapped to attention. Cordova straightened from her position by the window. Brennan's aggressive posture softened slightly, though his jaw remained tight. Sir, I was attempting to clarify Lieutenant Commander Bridger's actual role and authority at this facility. By cornering her in your office with 4 Marines blocking the exits? Reeves' voice was ice cold. That's not how we conduct professional inquiries, Staff Sergeant. That looks more like intimidation. Sir, I can assure you that was not my intent, Brennan began, but Reeves cut him off with a sharp gesture. You two, dismissed, the captain said, pointing at the instructors by the door. They left quickly, grateful to escape. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova, you as well. Cordova paused at the door, looking back at Nora with an expression that might have been apology or warning, then departed. The door closed behind her, leaving just Reeves, Brennan, and Nora in the office. Reeves turned to face them both, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. I'm going to say this once. Staff Sergeant Brennan, your ego has been wounded. I understand that. But Lieutenant Commander Bridger is a commissioned officer conducting authorized duties at this facility. You don't get to interrogate her. You don't get to investigate her background. And you certainly don't get to create situations that could be interpreted as harassment or intimidation. Is that absolutely clear? Yes, sir, Brennan replied, his face flushed. Reeves turned to Nora. Lieutenant Commander, I apologize for this incident. It won't happen again. However, I think it's time we had a frank conversation about what you're actually doing here. Not in front of the staff sergeant, but you and me privately. "Can you meet me in my office in 30 minutes?" "Of course, sir," Nora replied. "Dismissed," Reeves said. Nora left first, walking across the compound with measured steps that betrayed none of the adrenaline still coursing through her system. That had been close. If Reeves hadn't arrived when he did, she might have been forced to reveal more than she wanted or resort to physical intervention to extract herself. Either option would have compromised the mission. 30 minutes later, she stood in Captain Reeves' office, a space that reflected a career spent in service. Commendations on the walls, photos of Marine units in various deployments, a flag in the corner. Reeves sat behind his desk, his expression more tired than angry now. "Have a seat, Lieutenant Commander. And please, let's dispense with the formalities for a moment. I need to know what's really happening here." Nora settled into the chair across from him, making a calculation about how much to reveal. "Sir, I'm conducting a security assessment of this facility." "That much is true. My logistics officer cover allows me to observe operations across multiple units without drawing excessive attention." "Except you have drawn attention," Reeves pointed out. "Staff Sergeant Brennan isn't wrong that your expertise exceeds what a typical logistics officer would possess. So who are you really, and what exactly are you assessing?" Nora weighed her options. Reeves deserved some honesty, and she needed his cooperation to complete the mission, especially with the security test approaching. "Sir, my actual background is classified, but I can tell you that I have operational experience that goes beyond logistics. I was sent here to evaluate your facility's security protocols, emergency response capabilities, and vulnerability to potential threats." Reeves leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her carefully. "Naval Special Warfare Command?" "I can't confirm or deny that, sir," Nora replied. "But my assignment comes from high enough in the chain of command that I'm authorized to be here, and my observations are going to result in a comprehensive security review." The captain was quiet for a long moment. "Then why the elaborate cover? Why not just conduct an official inspection?" "Because official inspections produce predictable results," Nora explained. "Everyone's on their best behavior, procedures are followed perfectly, and we get a snapshot that doesn't reflect day-to-day operations. My assessment is designed to see how things actually work when people don't know they're being evaluated." Reeves nodded slowly. "That makes sense. And the issues you've identified, the range safety concerns, those were legitimate?" "Completely legitimate, sir. That's the point. While I'm embedded like this, I see the gaps that formal inspections miss. The calculation error that Staff Sergeant Brennan made wasn't because he's incompetent. It was because the standard checklist didn't catch a variable that should have been included. That's a system problem, exactly the kind of thing my assessment is designed to identify." The captain drummed his fingers on his desk. "All right, I can work with that. But here's my concern. Staff Sergeant Brennan is now actively hostile toward you. That's going to make it difficult for you to continue your assessment without constant friction. How do you want to handle it?" Nora considered the question carefully. "Sir, there's another element to this situation that you should be aware of. I have reason to believe this facility will face a security test within the next week. Probably a red team exercise designed to probe your defenses. My presence during that test is considered mission critical." Reeves sat up straighter, his professional instincts kicking in. "What kind of test? Who's running it?" "I don't have specific details, sir. Just that it's coming, and that my observations of how your personnel respond will be part of my final assessment." The captain's expression shifted from concern to calculating. "If there's a red team exercise coming, I need to brief my command staff. We need to prepare defensive protocols, enhance our security posture. With respect, sir, that would defeat the purpose of the test," Nora said carefully. "The point is to evaluate your current procedures under realistic conditions, not to see how well you perform when you know you're being tested." Reeves' jaw tightened. "So you wanted to leave my Marines vulnerable to whatever's coming, just so your assessment gets clean data?" "Not vulnerable, sir. Your current security measures should be adequate for most threats. The test is designed to identify gaps, not to actually compromise the facility. But if you change your procedures specifically because you know testing is imminent, we won't learn anything useful." The captain stood and walked to his window, looking out over the compound. After a long silence, he spoke without turning around. "How bad is our security posture, Lieutenant Commander, in your professional opinion?" "Honestly, sir, it's adequate but not exceptional. Your perimeter monitoring is solid, but your patrol patterns are predictable. Your visitor screening is thorough, but your credential verification has exploitable gaps. Your emergency response protocols are well documented, but you haven't tested them under stress in at least 6 months. You're not dangerously insecure, but a determined adversary with training could find ways through your defenses." Reeves turned back to face her. "And you've identified all this in less than a week?" "It's what I'm trained to do, sir." The captain returned to his desk and sat heavily. "All right, I'll keep this information to myself for now, but I want a commitment from you. If this security test poses any actual danger to my personnel, you'll intervene. I don't care if it compromises your assessment or your cover. My Marine's safety comes first." "Agreed, sir," Nora replied without hesitation. "If I see a genuine threat, I'll act." Reeves nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good. Now about Staff Sergeant Brennan. I'm going to have a very direct conversation with him about his conduct. He needs to understand that interfering with your assignment is interfering with official duties, regardless of what he thinks about you personally." "Thank you, sir," Nora said. "But I also need you to understand something, Lieutenant Commander. Brennan is a good Marine and an excellent instructor. His pride has been wounded, yes, but that's partly because you've made him look incompetent in front of his peers and superiors. Twice. Whether that was intentional or just a consequence of doing your job, the result is the same. He feels attacked, and he's responding accordingly." "I understand that, sir," Nora replied. "And if there had been another way to handle those situations without identifying the problems in real time, I would have taken it. But in both cases, waiting to report through channels would have either risked lives or compromised the demonstration." Reeves held up a hand. "I'm not criticizing your decisions. I'm just asking you to understand his perspective, and maybe, if possible, find a way to give him back some dignity before you leave. These Marines are going to be here long after your assessment is complete. I need them working together effectively, not nursing grudges and resentments." "I'll do what I can, sir," Nora said, though she wasn't sure what that would look like practically. The security test arrived 2 days later, at 0300 on a moonless morning. Nora was awake when it started, had been conducting her own patrol of the facility perimeter when she spotted the first intrusion. For figures moving through the darkness near the eastern fence line, their approach professional and nearly silent. Red Team operators, almost certainly Special Forces trained, using night vision and communications discipline that marked them as elite. She watched from concealment as they bypassed the motion sensors with practiced ease, exploiting one of the gaps she'd identified in her assessment. The perimeter guards were at the far end of their patrol route, exactly where predictable patterns had placed them. The intruders were inside the compound within 90 seconds, splitting into 2 pairs and moving towards separate objectives. Nora shadowed one pair, curious to see how far they'd penetrate before detection. They moved through the compound with confidence, clearly working from detailed intelligence. When they approached the armory, she expected alarms to trigger, but the security system had a blind spot in its camera coverage, another weakness she'd documented. The intruders took advantage of it, positioning themselves to access the building's side entrance. That's when the first shout went up. One of the roving security patrols had spotted the second pair near the communications building. Lights blazed across the compound. Alarms began wailing, and suddenly the quiet infiltration became a full-scale security response. Nora watched as Marines poured from barracks, pulling on gear and moving to defensive positions. The response was quick but disorganized. No one seemed certain who was in charge of coordinating the defense. The communication between units was chaotic, with multiple people trying to issue orders simultaneously. It was exactly the kind of confused response that her assessment had predicted. The Red Team operators near the armory saw the chaos erupting across the compound and made their move. They'd been caught before reaching their primary objective, but they could still complete a secondary goal. One of them produced what looked like a spray paint canister and marked a large X on the armory door, the universal symbol for objective reached during training exercises. Mission accomplished, even if they'd been detected. Nora remained in the shadows, watching as Marines converged on the communications building where the second pair had been spotted. But those operators had already vanished, having accomplished their goal of triggering the alarm and drawing security forces away from other potential targets. Classic diversion tactics, executed with precision. Captain Reeves arrived at a dead run, shouting for situation reports. Staff Sergeant Brennan was right behind him, already barking orders at the Marines, trying to organize a coherent response. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova emerged from the NCO barracks, took one look at the chaos, and began directing her people with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through actual combat. The next 20 minutes were a study in confusion versus competence. Some units responded well, establishing security perimeters and conducting methodical searches. Others ran around ineffectively, checking areas that had already been cleared or leaving gaps in their coverage. The Red Team operators, having accomplished their objectives, extracted through the same fence line they'd entered, disappearing into the darkness before any Marines got close to intercepting them. By 0400, the base was secured, the intruders were gone, and Captain Reeves was assembling his senior staff for an immediate after-action review. Nora joined them in the command center, her presence no longer questioned now that Reeves had sanctioned her role. For hostiles penetrated our perimeter, reached two separate objectives, and extracted without a single apprehension, Reeves said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Someone explained to me how that's acceptable. Sir, we responded within 2 minutes of initial detection, one of the watch commanders offered. That's within standard parameters. Standard parameters aren't good enough when the enemy is already inside your wire. Reeves shot back. Staff Sergeant Brennan, what's your assessment? Brennan looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. Sir, our response was adequate, but not coordinated. We had multiple people trying to direct the defense simultaneously. No clear chain of command for emergency situations. The intruders exploited gaps in our sensor coverage that we should have identified and addressed weeks ago. Nora caught the glance Brennan threw her way when he mentioned gaps that should have been identified. There was something in his expression now that hadn't been there before, a kind of grudging respect mixed with residual frustration. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova spoke up. Sir, we also need to address our patrol predictability. Those hostiles knew exactly when and where our perimeter guards would be. That's intelligence failure combined with procedural weakness. Reeves turned to Nora. Lieutenant Commander Bridger, I'm assuming this is related to your assessment. What's your professional evaluation of what just happened? The room went silent. Every eye turned to the Navy officer who'd been dismissed as a supply clerk just days ago. Nora could see the moment when several of them realized that her role had been something entirely different all along. Sir, what you just experienced was a professional Red Team penetration designed to test your security posture, Nora began, her voice clear and authoritative. The operators who conducted this exercise are likely special forces, possibly SEAL team members, specifically trained in facility infiltration. They identified and exploited multiple weaknesses in your defensive protocols, most of which I've documented in my ongoing assessment. She moved to the tactical display and began pointing out specific issues. Your motion sensors have blind spots at grid coordinates that the intruders used for entry and exit. Your patrol patterns follow predictable routes on predictable schedules. Your emergency response chain of command is unclear, leading to the coordination problems Staff Sergeant Brennan identified. And your communication protocols become chaotic under stress because you haven't conducted realistic training exercises to test them. One of the watch commanders spoke up, his voice skeptical. Ma'am, with respect, how would a logistics officer know what special forces infiltration techniques look like? Because I'm not a logistics officer, Nora replied calmly. I'm a naval special warfare operator conducting a security assessment of this facility. My cover was necessary to observe your actual operational procedures rather than the enhanced performance you display during a formal inspection. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Brennan's face had gone pale, then flushed red as the implications sank in. The woman he'd been dismissing and harassing for a week was an operator, probably a SEAL, someone whose expertise far exceeded his own in areas he thought he owned. Captain Reeves held up a hand for silence. Lieutenant Commander Bridger has been operating under my authority and with full authorization from Naval Special Warfare Command. Her assessment has identified critical vulnerabilities that tonight's exercise confirmed. We're going to address every single one of them, starting immediately. Marcus Webb was staring at Nora with something approaching awe. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova simply nodded, as if this confirmed suspicions she'd held all along. And Brennan sat frozen, his expression cycling through shock, embarrassment, and what might have been the beginning of understanding. "Sir, if I may," Nora continued, addressing Reeves but speaking to the room. "The fact that you were penetrated tonight isn't a failure of individual Marines. You have good people here. This is a failure of systems and procedures. Every weakness the Red Team exploited is fixable. Your perimeter sensors need repositioning. Your patrol schedules need randomization. Your emergency response needs a clear command structure, and your communication protocols need stress testing. These are all correctable problems." The after-action meeting continued for another hour, with Nora providing detailed recommendations for each identified weakness. She kept her tone professional and constructive, focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on failures. By the time Reeves dismissed the group, most of the senior staff were looking thoughtful rather than defensive. They'd been given a roadmap for improvement, and Marines responded well to clear objectives. As the room emptied, Brennan remained seated, staring at the tactical display. Nora gathered her notes slowly, giving him space but not leaving. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. "I've been a complete ass." "Yes, you have," Nora replied simply. He turned to face her then, his expression stripped of the arrogance that had defined their interactions. "I spent a week trying to undermine someone who was trying to keep my Marines safe. I questioned your credentials, your authority, your right to be here. And the whole time, you were operating at a level I can't even comprehend. You were defending your program and your reputation," Nora said. "That's not unreasonable. You just didn't have all the information." Brennan shook his head. "That's generous, but it doesn't excuse my behavior. I let my ego override my judgment. When you identified that range safety issue, I should have thanked you. Instead, I treated it like a personal attack. And everything that followed was me doubling down on that mistake." Nora pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Staff Sergeant, can I tell you something? In my line of work, ego gets people killed. Not just the person with the ego, but their teammates, their mission partners, everyone around them. The fact that you can recognize and admit your mistake puts you ahead of a lot of operators I've worked with. The question is what you do next." "What can I do?" Brennan asked. "I've spent a week building a case against you that makes me look like a paranoid fool. I've documented evidence of my own incompetence and filed complaints that are going to come back to haunt me. Or you could learn from it," Nora suggested. "Captain Reeves is going to implement major security improvements based on my assessment. You could be part of that process. Take the lessons from this experience and use them to make your program stronger." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "The range safety protocols you identified, the issues with coordination and communication, those apply to sniper operations too. We run complex training exercises with multiple teams, just like the base runs security operations. If our procedures have similar gaps, people could get hurt." "Exactly," Nora said. "And you're in a position to fix those problems before they become crises." He nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Would you be willing to review my training protocols? Give me the same kind of assessment you gave the base security? I know I don't have any right to ask after how I've treated you, but my Marines deserve better than what I've been giving them." Nora considered the request. Her official assessment was complete. The security test had provided the final data she needed, and she could justify returning to her command. But Brennan was offering something valuable, a chance to extend the positive impact of her work and to help a capable instructor become better at his job. "It's not my primary mission, but I have a few more days before I leave. I can review your protocols and make recommendations." "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander," Brennan said, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the facility, his gratitude sounded genuine. Over the next 3 days, Nora worked with Brennan and his team to overhaul their training procedures. She identified gaps in their safety protocols, suggested improvements to their coordination processes, and shared techniques for stress testing procedures under realistic conditions. The staff sergeant proved to be a quick learner when his ego wasn't in the way, asking intelligent questions and implementing changes with the same intensity he'd previously directed at undermining her presence. Gunnery Sergeant Cordova stopped by the range office on the second day, finding Nora and Brennan reviewing updated range safety checklists. "Looks like you two figured out how to work together," she observed. "Turns out the lieutenant commander is pretty good at her job when I'm not actively sabotaging her efforts," Brennan replied with a wry smile. Cordova looked at Nora with frank curiosity. "I knew you were something special from day one. The way you moved, the way you saw things. But I'll admit, I didn't guess SEAL. That's impressive for anyone, extraordinary for a woman in that community." "It's not about being extraordinary," Nora said. "It's about being competent and doing the job. Same as any operator, regardless of gender." "Fair enough," Cordova replied. "But you've done good work here, Lieutenant Commander. This base is going to be better because of your assessment. And Brennan's program is going to be safer because you took the time to help him fix his procedures." On her final day at the facility, Captain Reeves called a formation to address the security improvements being implemented. He didn't reveal Nora's true identity to the general base population, maintaining operational security, but he made it clear that significant changes were coming based on recent assessments and testing. After the formation, Marcus Webb approached Nora as she prepared to depart. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say it's been an honor having you here. When I joined the Marines, they told me the best operators are the ones you never see coming. You prove that. Take care of yourself, petty officer," Nora replied. "Keep that rifle clean and your eyes open." If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character, or if you've ever witnessed someone's hidden capabilities being revealed under pressure. Your thoughts mean everything to us. Nora drove away from Camp Pendleton as the sun set over the Pacific, her assessment complete and her recommendations submitted. The facility would implement new security protocols, Brennan would run safer training operations, and Marines would be better protected because of the work she'd done. It wasn't the dramatic kind of mission that made headlines, but it was the kind that saved lives through careful preparation and attention to detail. Her phone buzzed with a message from Commander Ashford. "Well done, Phantom. Next assignment briefing Monday, 0800. Enjoy your weekend." Nora smiled and accelerated onto the highway, already thinking about what challenges the next mission would bring.